while the traffic may be considered local, it will still impact the street. I believe that in a happy, vibrant community, there are strong social connections that create a sense of belonging, and along with this belonging comes a sense of responsibility to support your fellow community members. Communities provide a soul-nurturing experience when you have the opportunity to contribute and know the others are there for you. The community around this street has already been through 10 years of blasting, digging, dirt, and construction traffic. And I'd like to point out that the approval of each subsequent building drives members of the community away. A parcel of 5 houses now along Clifton Road have been sold again to a developer because people feel that there is no other out. My husband and I would like to see the principles of the Westboro-Richmond Road Plan respected. You have to realize that at this point, cumulatively, as each building comes seeking to be excused from the zoning and variance in this place, the objectives of the big picture planning are further eroded. And by approving this application, you would be endorsing what amounts to irresponsible building practices, allowing a project that asking for such an increase in building height and setback completely undermines the plan as drafted and fundamentally alters what's left of the neighborhood. Councillor Leeper has already secured a commitment to revisit the out-of-date plan for Westboro that fails to put reasonable and predictable limits on growth and results in developer-friendly ad hoc planning. We are asking you today to refuse this application until this secondary plan is revised. I'd like to thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Have you submitted that?
I have in written comments previously.
But your presentation, it would be helpful if you...
I can email it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Any questions, anybody? Thank you very much for coming out. Clearly, it's good that we're doing this because, you know, I'm saying that, you know, I can tell how involved you are, that you really would have looked for it and you just were missed. So thank you very much. Mark Baker Parsons for questions. Do we have any questions, anybody? No? Brian, are you here for, where are you? Are you here for questions too?
I'm here for questions, and I suppose you heard my comments the last time. So.
Yes, we did. Do you want your comments from the last meeting to be submitted into this meeting?
If that's possible, that would be ideal.
We can.
Okay.
Sure. Question to staff? Councillor Brockington? And I'm going to reserve the right then for him to come back up if necessary.
This truly is for staff. Can you just let me know, what did we do after the first meeting where we realized there was an issue with notice and consultation? What did we do differently before this meeting was held?
Madam Chair, we did an assessment, checked in with our IT services to find out what happened with the circulation. The circulation was completed, but I think there must have been some sort of a glitch because there were people that self-identified that they didn't receive it. From our office's perspective, the information was sent, but there must have had something technically happen in that translation of things being delivered.
So did everyone get like a resubmission? So everyone had equal opportunity to come back here?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dudas?
Just 2 questions. In respect to the Section 37 provisions in this, does Bill 108 and any of those changes, I know Mr. Willis just commented on this, does this put any of those in jeopardy?
Madam Chair, the answer is possibly. We do not have the transitional provisions. We do not know at which point a file will be or a bylaw will be such that we get the Section 37 funds and when that will change. It is an unknown at this time, Madam Chair. But we can do no more than we're doing.
And a second question, the secondary plan that was being updated, what's the time frame on that?
Madam Chair, it's my understanding in talking with people in the policy section that The timing for that is sort of unknown or indeterminate right now. They're focusing on the main official plan to get that done, whereas in putting all hands forward on that. So it would come after that or as part of that overall revamp of the official plan.
So you're thinking Q1 of 2020? Sorry, I'm just trying to get...
No, I'm saying it would be after the official plan, after the revamp of the big official plan, the primary official plan. So everyone's working on that as opposed to the individual or on this one in particular.
So we're talking years out?
Yes, Madam Chair, it won't be next year.
Okay. I was just wondering, so if this project was to be voted down, delayed, there's still no alignment in terms of timing?
No, well, Madam Chair, whenever an application comes in, and it wouldn't matter, there's you go under the policy direction that's in front of you today. I know there was a request to have it set aside until that was done, but we have obligations under the Planning Act to process applications within a certain amount of time, or they could be appealed by the owner as well. It wouldn't actually, I'll be honest, it wouldn't matter because they get to go under the policy regime that they came in when they had to file an application as deemed complete. So we have to deal with the policies that are before us today. And you will notice that there is no official plan amendment today. So what happens is that this development actually follows that secondary plan that is in place today.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, anyone else? Oh, yes, sorry. Councillor Leeper.
Just a quick comment on this one. You heard my request last meeting to turn this development down, and I will repeat that. I think, we have far too much parking for something that is close to transit. There's no affordable housing here, and I think the design is uninspiring. Unfortunately, this is one of the last parcels on Scott Street that Westboro secondary plan, by the time it is finally adopted, will do nothing to guide development on Scott Street. I'm still pressing staff to move forward with that because we know that the pressure is going to be on Churchill. We especially know that the pressure is going to be on Richmond, and it's critical that we guide that as thoughtfully as possible. But unfortunately, this kind of ad hoc development is what happens when you don't have an up-to-date, defensible secondary plan for a neighborhood. Did you want, and I also just quickly want to add my thanks to Chair Harder and to Mr. Willis. My office, we've satisfied ourselves that every effort was made to notify residents. We're satisfied that there was a technical glitch, and I think it was a Sunday morning text to Steve and to Chair Harder that broke through a log jam and ensured that this was going to come back for a do-over. So I do appreciate their amenability to that. Did you want me to make this motion?
Yes,
I have
please.
a motion on the table as well. So this is a motion to amend report recommendation 2, document 1, details of recommended zoning. Whereas this report zoning bylaw amendment 1950 Scott 312 314 Clifton seeks to rezone the subject lands, and whereas recommendation 2 indicates that the implementing zoning bylaw not to proceed to council until such time as the agreement under section 37 of the Planning Act is executed, and whereas the applicant has control over the property only through a purchase and sale agreement with final sale contingent on the zoning bylaw amendment being in effect, and whereas the current property owner will not sign the section 37 agreement, therefore be it resolved that in order for the applicant to be able to sign the required section 37 agreement, report recommendation 2, which indicates that the implementing bylaw not proceed to council until such time as the section 37 agreement is executed, be deleted, and be it further resolved that the details of the recommended zoning documented 2 be amended to include the following provision applicable to the new exception. A holding symbol is placed on the property, and that holding symbol may only be removed once the section 37 agreement or similar development agreement has been executed, which must occur prior to site plan control approval. So assuming that section 37 still exists at the point at which this moves forward, and it is a very significant Section 37 agreement. I share residents' concerns about the traffic impacts in this particular block. I've earmarked $325,000 of very significant benefits envelope to make physical changes to the streets around the building that will work through its site plan. Assuming that Section 37 still exists, this will make sure that the development does not move forward without our getting those benefits.
Thank you. So we have that on the floor. Mr. Casagrande, you have a copy of this, or you know about this? Yes. Okay. Anybody else have anything? No? So, oh, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that Councillor Leeper has done on this in terms of working with the community. I'm looking at the report on it, and in terms of the buildings, and I'm surprised at the amount of parking that's being allowed for these units. I thought the whole point of transit-oriented development was to reduce parking, and yet there'll be enough parking for, well, every single unit. That is not supposed to be what's going forward. It's, you know, it just kind of surprised me because it seems to be all over the map what the parking rules are, because I'm getting developers coming to me with, you know, up to 50 units with no parking, and in other cases, zero parking. And then this one is supposed to be right across the street. It emphasizes how it's only 150 meters from the transit station, and yet it's got parking for everybody. So it's really not fitting in with the whole philosophy that we've been talking about. So I understand Councillor Leeper's concerns about, you know, the official plan and how this doesn't quite fit what I thought we were doing.
Okay. I don't think it was a question. I think it was a statement. So, all right. So on the motion that was tabled by Councillor Leeper regarding Section 37, it's carried. And on the item as amended, Scott Street, carried. Thank you. Okay, we have Ms. Snedden is going now to give us a presentation on planning services funding review and staff increase. And then we do have Ted Phillips is here to speak to us on behalf of GOBA.
No. I was the first. I already had it up. Oh, right up here. That's me. Yeah.
I thought we were on item 3.
No, sorry, it's okay. Great, perfect, thanks.
Go ahead, Leanne. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of committee. Thank you very much for allowing us a few minutes on the agenda. I have with me Nancy Winans, who is our manager of accounts for our department. She's been significant on this project. I'd also like to acknowledge Lynn Lowe and Daniel Oliver, two staff members in Charmaine Forgey's group, Business Services, that have supported us with this review. So we are here to seek approval for a 20% increase in fees across the board in the development review area, with the exception of site plan. We are also here to ask for committee and council's approval for 7 additional FTEs. We, as part of our objective with this financial review, is to get to cost recovery to reduce the tax burden. Our applications have been increasing over time. We're going to talk about that today. Currently, as where we are today, we're 24% above last year's performance. And this has been a recurring theme of increasing applications without a corresponding increase in staff. Just so that you're aware, we've had meetings with the development industry to review our proposed fees. They have indicated that they are supportive of this fee increase as much as anyone could be supportive of a fee increase, but they do have some concerns, and those are to ensure that we are processing our development applications more quickly, and that we potentially look at a reserve fund for any surpluses in the future, and I suspect you'll probably hear more from the industry today on that. Just so that you're aware as well, as part of our examination of staffing requirements, I'm going to move them now. That was my intro. So for our fees, we are asking for cost of living. There'll be a cost of living increase, $250,000. Our 7 additional resources, 5 engineers, 1 solicitor, and 1 co-op student. We're looking at $800,000. We have also fees that are required for us to be able to pay for the land management solution. Land management solution is a technology that we need to replace our existing system. Our existing system is 20 years old. We've identified a payment process over the next 12 years to be able to recover again, so this is not on the tax base. This is phase 1 of our review. We will be undertaking phase 2, and in our phase 2, we'll be looking at our indirect costs. Phase 1 is only our direct costs. And phase 2 will also look at how we're going to be able to fund not only our capital for the new technology solution, but also our operating costs. So we have undertaken to hear what the industry is saying in terms of we really need to improve our current process. We are undertaking to begin a legal agreement review in terms of how we process our legal agreements. We'll be looking at the post-approval subdivision process in terms of getting to registration. We undertook an engineering review last year, and we've got about 10 recommendations that we're working on right now. So we've seen a significant improvement in our engineering practices. And we also have an external engineering firm that helps us out with site plans when we get into a backlog situation. Just wanted you to be aware that we've had a municipal best practice. We selected a few municipalities to see how we're doing with our fees in comparison to others. And you'll see from this chart, we are significantly lower than some of the major cities in this province. Even with our proposed fees, we're still under. Our increase, we have a cost of living increase of 2.6%. That covers the portion of the 20% I mentioned. The additional resources equate to 9.6%. And that technology is 7. We're also asking for minor increases in our design review and inspection fees by 0.25 and 0.5 for our soft and hard costs. These fees have not been increased in a great number of years. Volume of applications as identified has been increasing. So you'll see from this chart overall, in 2016, we had about 839 applications. By 2018, we're over 100 more, up to 939. Again, no increases in staff. We're tracking right now to likely be over 1,000 applications. That concludes, Madam Chair, our presentation.
Thanks very much, Leanne. I know that this is something you've been thinking about and working on for quite a while, so I appreciate you having it on the agenda today. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I am going to have Ted come up. Ted Phillips. Come forward, Ted. And then we're going to have a direction too. Ted, are you speaking on behalf of GOPA?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for letting me speak today, members of committee. Leanne reached out to us several months ago and indicated her desire to bring forward this report and make some changes, and I have to say we were skeptical. I have been working in the city for about 30 years, and up until amalgamation, we used to pay fees to both the former region and the city for things, and it was quite cumbersome, and the fees that we were paying, in fact, were significant to the cost of our developments. And at amalgamation, we were all excited that we would have one government, that would all be better, and we would expedite things and things would all get better. Well, guess what? They didn't. And within the first year after amalgamation, Larry Morrison, who most of you probably don't know that name, Larry Morrison sat down with the industry, and we negotiated on subdivisions a reduction in fee from 3.5% of some $10 to $20 million worth of works that were being done to a staggered fee structure. Less than 6 months later, Larry's boss came along, Ned Lathrop, and said, well, I'm going to make things better for you folks, and I'm going to double your fees, and I'm going to wipe out the savings that Larry just negotiated with you guys because we want to hire more staff. The reality is no more staff were hired. Years went by, fees went up, Nancy Sheppers came along, and the same thing happened. We were made promises that we were going to get better service because we were going to hire more staff, and that's why we were increasing fees. So by the time Leanne got along here, she got a little bit of angst from many of my colleagues saying, yes, we've heard it twice before, we're a little skeptical. But we have a great deal of faith in Ms. Sneddon and Mr. Willis, and we are very happy to support this report going forward. We do, however, have two, I think, fairly small requests that I would hope that you would think are reasonable. One of them deals with the fees that we're paying. In the process, I believe Nancy identified that there was some 100,000, 200,000. There was a chunk of fees that had not been spent this year yet, that are fees that we've paid for applications that are moving forward. Unfortunately, in the past, my understanding is when there was a surplus, those fees got thrown into general revenues. And we don't think that that's actually fair, that fees that we're paying to the planning department for processing work should be thrown into general revenue. So we would like the city to consider taking any surplus fees that are given or made through planning applications, that they would go into a reserve account. And that way, when we have years like we have this year where there's significant increases in applications, that if things slow down in a subsequent year, Ms. Sneddon's department can retain the staff that she's got, and it would have almost a mill rate smoothing effect within her department that would be self-managed. So we would like to see a reserve account set up to take those fees. They would be traded basically like what the building department does right now, where the building department manage a maximum number of millions of dollars in a reserve account that if there is a slowdown in the economy, Mr. Bidden doesn't have to let his staff go. They can continue to make the same level of service. So that would be item one, is the creation of a reserve account to both capture the existing reserve and future reserves that may be generated. The second item that I'd like to suggest is that, I know Mr. Mark will not like these comments, we have been exacerbated by the dialogues that we have within the legal department and the difference between the two departments. As little as several months ago, we were actually informed as an industry we can no longer talk to the lawyers in the legal department because we're not lawyers. I've felt free to call Mr. Mark for 30 years, and I find it insulting to find out that because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not allowed to call him anymore. So we would like to see the legal fees that we're paying as a result of this increase in fees and the creation of a new lawyer, and or perhaps a lawyer and a law clerk, whatever may fall out of it, that lawyer report to Ms. Sneddon, that they be an in-house counsel. Now, I know we've asked for this before, and in fact, at amalgamation, we asked if there couldn't be a creation of a lawyer and a couple of law clerks in the planning department, and we were told, no, this is the best way, we're going to give them great service and so on. But again, we haven't experienced that great service, although I do like Mr. Mark, and he's a very great lawyer. Having said that, if there is a way that this report could identify somehow that there be a legal team or a lawyer and a law clerk, whatever, in Ms. Sneddon's department, I think that would be helpful. We actually have 3 lawyers that work in-house at Taggart's office. They report to our CFO, and one of the things that we had heard was that lawyers can't work for common folks, so we think that that's incorrect. Those are my 2 points, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
No, really good, and really good comments, and certainly Ms. Sneddon and I have talked about it. We've talked with Mr. Mark about it, and I think back to when I was an Nepean councillor, so just 19 years ago or so, and I used to jokingly call it Jack's Slush Fund, but the fact is that the reason the building permits you're talking about, that we keep that, I mean, you know, from the outside looking in, you think, well, you know, that's a lot of money and you've got a reserve of whatever. But it's important for the reasons that have been identified, that the size of the projects, the nature of the business, the community concerns, and the work that we do as councillors working with our communities that change the timelines that are not predictable. Therefore, you need to have the money that is available to do the work when you're doing the work. So this is no different than that. And I think that, one, I'm really happy to see it because, you know, I guess because myself and Vice Chair Tierney are in the position we are, I think other chairs around the table would be seeing the same thing from time to time with your own staff that other people don't see. But we know how tight it is. And, you know, as councillors, we're always responding on behalf of our citizens, whether it's our business citizens, our resident citizens. And when we do that, with the work plan that we always have, that's always aggressive and being short-staffed, this is going to give us the ability to actually tie the staffing to the applications and deal with it. So we do have a direction, and I know Councillor Kavanagh has wants to speak. I can tell you that on the issue of who reports to that, and I see Mr. Kanalakis is down here, probably some spidey sense told him that he should come down here, because I was going to say, even without you prompting me, that on organizational chart issues, there's one person at the city that has control over that, and guess what? It's not us, it's him. It's Mr. Kanalakis. So we can't make a decision today that has an impact on the organizational chart. That's something that the direction would be that with regard to the legal person and clerk perhaps, reporting directly to the Director of Planning, that be undertaken as an investigation. You know, on the downside, I mean, if they come back and they say and that, no, we're going to leave it where it is, it's going to be tied to our city solicitor, the fact is publicly highlighting the fact that we need a change here in the way that it flows is important. And so that's part of this direction. And the other part of the direction speaks to the money. So for anybody, and I don't see very many people from the public as opposed to the developer community here, but for any of you, like, I mean, would it be right for us to go into the pockets of the people of Barrhaven and say, hey, I'm going to hire 10 more people and trust me. And then you don't hire the 10 people, or maybe you hire the 10 people, but actually they're working on things in Councillor Dudas's ward and have nothing to do with the Barrhaven piece. And all of a sudden, at the end of the year, hey, we've got this much money left over. We'll toss that into the general revenues. That's not right. This is a specific service. Planning has the smallest budget of anyone, with the exception of the affordable housing capital piece of it. And we are absolutely directly related to work in, work out, right? And how that all shapes up. So it's very, very important that we give them the tools that they have financially to make sure that the system is going to do exactly what it's saying. Otherwise, we're just taking your money, right? So the direction is, whereas Planning Committee is considering a report with respect to fees and staffing, and whereas the Planning Act requires that fees imposed under the Act for planning applications only be utilized in respect of the cost of dealing with such applications, and whereas it is also desirable that there be stability with respect to fees from year to year. Further, whereas the report on staffing recommends creation of a position in legal services as well as positions within planning services, and whereas it is key to the successful processing of planning applications that there be integration between legal services and planning services, and whereas a review of the planning agreement process is shortly to be underway. That's the other piece that's recently Ms. Snedden has contracted someone to undertake this study. The Director of Planning Services and the General Manager of Financial Services City Treasurer be directed to submit to Planning Committee and Council a report with respect to the desirability of creating a reserve fund for planning fees, and the Director Planning Services and City Solicitor be directed directed to submit a report with respect to improving the coordination of legal services with planning services. Both of the above reports be submitted no later than the second quarter of 2020. So it's a relatively quick turnaround. Ms. Sneddon has to go and find some information. We have to see how it all works out. Hopefully Human Resources keeps up with us. And because you're here, I just have to tie you into the conversation, you know. But anyways, I think that this is a really strong direction, and we'll get that information. Okay? Councillor Kavanagh has questions, and if anybody has any other questions, can we put this up on the screen? It is up? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I can appreciate the workload that you're getting now, especially with Stage 2 LRT. The workload is obviously increasing very much, and it's going to continue, particularly with the official plan. There's more to sort out, and it can't come fast enough to have some good rules in place. My question is in terms of turnaround time, do we keep track of that? Because I expect that one of the issues is that, time is money too. When we have fewer planners, you're not able to get to people as quickly, therefore projects are delayed. And it costs us money too, because it's problematic to have delays. So I just want to know if there's any goals that you're trying to reach. I don't know how else to put it, that you put in your own what you consider to be the right amount of time, and if you're looking to improve it. Sort of like, the way people are looking at the buses right now, can you improve the bus time or whatever? But do we have targets that we're looking to meet? Because I'm hearing from small developers particularly who don't have the resources to, do the back and forth, and it's harder on them, particularly when, there's delays in getting things done.
Madam Chair, that's a great question, and we have about 16 different application types, and overall, we're likely meeting our timelines just slightly over 50% of the time. It's a challenge. There's no question. We track all of our timelines and all of our applications, and we report annually to this committee each year on our progress. So I'd also like to add, too, there will be more pressure with the Bill 108 changes, because the timelines that we currently have been shortened significantly with the expectation that the province has. So just in terms of reacting to that, I've been meeting with the management team and the development review group. I had a directors forum with all the directors in the organization and their staff just 2 weeks ago on how can we improve the development review process. And I've got a meeting scheduled with the development industry as well in October. And I'm going to be getting some feedback from councillors as well in addition to that. So we do need to make some significant changes in our processes if we're going to meet these timelines. The ask that I have today is a very, very small ask in terms of a resource ask, but we are going to have to change the way we do business, and we're going to have to find a way to do that.
Thank you very much. Further to that, I just want to emphasize that when I say, more efficiencies, I want to make sure that we have that public input, and that is a very important part of it. It's crucial. So that has to be factored in, and we have to, give enough time for, the public to respond. We hear concerns. We heard one earlier about that they don't have enough time, and that requires more staff, because you got to keep on top of the questions that come in and be able to answer them in a timely fashion. Has that been factored in?
Madam Chair, the consultation will always be a key and important component of development moving forward, and I don't believe the province is intending to change that. I think with the new technology that we're also purchasing, I'm hopeful that that's also going to help and aid us in our ability to be able to track comments a little bit more efficiently, to be able to drive some of that technology that's available that we're hoping to purchase very, very soon, that will help us manage and project manage our files a little bit more efficiently. So absolutely, short answer is public consultation will still be a part of the process.
Okay, so some of that cost is for more communications with the public.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know that is necessarily, if it ends up being that, I think that it's the staff. We actually need the communications is one thing, and I don't like you're not, we're not taking money from them for communications. The outreach that we do on the applications has a total amount of money, right? For the cost of doing an application. I mean, it costs them for the outreach, for the communications, for, you know, all of the things that you do, but it's not, I don't know that you got the answer that you were thinking you were.
From my brief experience doing this job, we're using planners to answer questions. We're using the planners to deal with the public, and that is part of, you know, the process. So it takes a time to do that.
Yeah, it does.
And we need it to be done well, and, you know, the last thing I want to be thought of is bogging them down. It's part of the process, so we have to allow that, and that, to me, is communication with the public.
You know what I really like about what Ms. Sneddon does, and it's a different approach because how have you been doing this for almost like 5 years now? 5 years, yeah, because I've been doing this for 5 years. But she's always open. She's always looking for that kind of balance, if you will, and seeing where there are. So I'm confident that your concerns are going to be just like your concerns that you just had about how we're going to be able to react with the stage 2 that's just starting, and it's going to need to be on time and connected and all that stuff. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I just want to clarify that. Okay, anybody have any questions for Mr. Phillips, though? No. Thanks, Ted. Mr. Gower, Councillor Gower, then Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask about Bill 108 and the compressed timelines, but you've answered Councillor Kavanaugh's question. The land management system, you've touched on a little bit just now. What does this system allow you to do that you can't do now? That would be one question. So, you know, where are there gaps or where are there deficiencies in the current system? And then if you could elaborate a little more at, it seems to be primarily an internal tool for the development process, but, you know, what is the public-facing part of that, or you know, how would residents benefit from that as well?
Madam Chair, I'll answer that question as best as I can, given the fact that we're in an active procurement process, so I won't be able to go into details yet because we don't have a signed contract. But ideally, what we are procuring is a solution that will better be able to manage our workflows internally. It'll better be able to manage the client files, so the developers' files, payment schedules, their applications. Things will be able to be submitted online and electronically. So everything will be captured in one system, and then there will be a public portal as well, so that comments will be able to be fed through the system and accessed from a public portal. We will have the ability to better, gather those comments that do come in that Councillor Kavanagh has identified that takes staff time to manage and sift through. The system will be able to better project manage our timeline. So it's almost like a UPS parcel that you get. We're going to be a little bit more accountable and transparent about where the application is in the process. So at any point in time, anybody can go and find out where is my application and how is it tracking, as opposed to picking up the phone and calling staff and taking more time away from people from processing their applications, trying to find out where is my application in this process. So those are high level. Ideally, those are the things that we're going to be achieving with this new technology.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to follow up outside of this meeting. I have a couple of pieces of feedback to share on that, so thank you.
Just a quick question for Ms. Sneddon. Thank you for the overview. You said you have to look with your team ways of doing things differently to, I guess, modernize or just to streamline the department. How will you keep this committee updated on the changes that you're going to be making and whether or not those changes have been successful?
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to bring back an information report to the committee to advise the committee in terms of where we're at. I should have something ready at the end of the year, beginning of January, in terms of when we start out the new year, how we're going to be able to find some of these efficiencies. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so we have the direction. Do we agree with the direction? Should the direction go forward? Is there a direction? And then on the motion to recommend that we approve the amendments to planning application fees, and the addition of 7 full-time equivalent positions. Is that Carrie? Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, the next item that was held, hang on, Jeff, is the, I think it's the high-rise. I think I went right by it just a minute. Yeah, zoning provisions for high-rise buildings and amendment to correct an anomaly in the GM General Mixed-Use Zone concerning high-rise buildings. And we have speakers on this, and Carol Ruddy is presenting. Thank you, Carol.
Good morning, Chair and members of committee. The report before you deals with new zoning provisions for high-rise buildings, and it also proposes to correct an error in the GM zone provisions. So these provisions were developed in combination with the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings, approved in by council on May 23rd, 2018. The provisions include requirements for minimum lot area and tower separation distance for 3 areas of the city: the mixed-use downtown zone, areas outside of the mixed-use downtown zone that are inside the Greenbelt, and then urban areas outside of the Greenbelt. And currently, there are no general provisions in the zoning bylaw to regulate high-rise building development. The intent of the provisions is to maintain access to light in public and private spaces, maintain privacy for occupants of buildings, preserve public views and sky views, and to ensure the responsibility for tower separation distance is not unfairly placed on a single property owner. And the technical amendment is proposed to correct an error in bylaw 2014-292 concerning provisions for high-rise buildings in the GM mixed-use zone. That bylaw separated a single land use, at the time mid-rise and high-rise apartment building, into 2 separate land uses: mid-rise apartment and high-rise apartment. Provisions were added to all of the zone provisions where the building heights permitted both of the uses. In the case of the GM zone, inadvertently, the provision to permit a high-rise building in the GM zone where a building height would permit it was inadvertently omitted from the provisions. So this amendment would add that provision in there. In terms of history of zoning for high-rise buildings, in former Ottawa, as early as 1968 and continuing until 2008, the former and current City of Ottawa zoning bylaw included a floor space index provision, maximum building height and/or height plane schedules to regulate the envelope of high-rise buildings. Under the former Ottawa zoning bylaw, lands in what are currently in the mixed-use downtown zone were generally subject to floor space index of between 2 and 8, with no requirements for a setback of the building from the lot line. So a floor space index is the ratio of the amount of floor area that's permitted in a building relative to the area of the lot. So if your lot was 100 square meters and you had a floor space index of 8, the gross floor area of the building could be 800 square meters. And that means that if you built the building to the lot line, and 0 lot line, as the mixed-use downtown zone permits, you would have 100% coverage of the lot to 8 stories. However, you could modify the design or the bulk of the building so that you could have, for instance, a 27-story building that would be the maximum height generally in the mixed-use downtown zone, occupying a much smaller footprint on the lot. And so that's how you would get your taller, slimmer towers under the former zoning provisions. When the MD zone provisions in the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-250 came into effect in 2008,
The FSI provisions were removed, while the permission to build a lot line and the maximum height provisions were carried forward. So this meant that where the maximum building height is regulated by a height plane, and that maximum building height permitted 27 stories, you are now permitted to build lot line to 27 stories, whereas previously the bulk of the building would have been approximately a third to two-thirds less than that. So staff have reviewed the outcome of the removal of the FSI provisions in the mixed-use downtown zone in the 11 years since the provisions were removed. Removal of the FSI provisions resulted in the building envelope of high-rise buildings being unregulated from a zoning perspective, except for building height. And this has resulted in what, in some situations, has resulted in very narrow or very little separation distance between buildings, and this has an impact on the public realm. It has an impact on how the street feels, on the amount of light that gets into this, down into the street, how much skies a view people are able to see from the street, and it affects the occupants of buildings as well. The separation distance requirements proposed in this report will reintroduce controls on the envelope of high-rise buildings beyond the only control in the MD zone that is currently in effect, which is the maximum height provisions. So just to go over the three sets of zoning provisions for the different areas in the city. In the mixed-use downtown zone, staff are proposing a 7.5 meter setback from side and rear lot lines from that portion of the building that is the tower. So the tower is that, you've got the podium that the tower sits on. In the mixed-use downtown zone, the maximum height of the tower would be 6 stories, or the width of the street abutting the lot, whichever is less. And then beyond the height of that podium, the tower would have to be nipped in on the sides and rear, 7.5 meters. And then there's a minimum lot area provision for each of the areas in the city. That is 900 square meters in the case of the mixed-use downtown zone for a corner lot, and 350 square meters for the interior lots. And the reason for the minimum lot area is to ensure that this complex form of development has enough space to accommodate all of the things that it needs, such as access for vehicles, accommodating all the interior organization of the building for how garbage is going to be picked up, and all of the
Ms. Ruddy, you're going to have to pick up speed.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Because you know what? 5 minutes is the 5 minutes, and you're not even halfway through your presentation now.
Apologies, I'll keep going.
Yeah.
So the difference,
just more over. We can read the slides and stuff like that.
Okay.
But
since you looked at these provisions in 2008 or 2018 in May when they were received, the provisions have been revised to delete an area of the downtown bounded by, as shown on this schedule, and that is in recognition of the fact, well, it's in response to requests from property owners and recognition of the fact that these lands are already developed extensively with high-rise buildings, and the established character is already there. Certain areas of the city will be excluded, and these are the the next set of provisions are for the interior or inside the green belt and then outside the green belt. Inside the green belt is the darker area on this schedule. The provisions that apply to outside the green belt are shown apply to the areas that are in the lighter areas in this schedule. The provisions for inside the green belt, it's a 10-meter setback from side and rear lot lines. For that portion of the building over 9 stories, or the width of the abutting street, whichever is less. The minimum lot area, 1,150 square meters for a corner lot, 1,350 for an interior lot. And provisions for outside, 11.5 meters from the side and rear lot lines for that portion of the building over 9 stories once again. And minimum lot areas are slightly larger, given the lot fabric in these areas. 1,350 square meters in a corner lot, 1,800 square meters for an interior lot. Areas that have secondary planning policies that provide detailed area-specific guidance through, and these were arrived at through lengthy public consultation processes for minimum lot area or separation distances for high-rise buildings, won't be subject to these provisions. In those cases, the policies in those documents will prevail. And these are the areas of the city that would not be subject to the zoning provisions. There are transitions provisions.
Do you have a map that actually shows this? I think you do later on in your slides. I mean,
It's right there.
Perfect.
The secondary planning
Thank
areas.
you.
Yeah. And there are transitions provisions proposed to look after previous applications for high-rise buildings that have been approved. Those would be able to continue through their building permit and site plan control processes. If they've got complete applications in for zoning, they can come in under that zoning at that time and get their site plan control under the provisions that they got for the zoning. And if they have a complete application for site plan control in before October 9th, when council approves these provisions, then they would come in under those zoning provisions that were in effect at the time they made the applications. And this slide summarizes the reasons for these zoning provisions, and that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. I think we have questions. I do have speakers. I'll go to the speakers first, okay? Brian Casagrande. Brian? Is that you, Glenn? Oh. Okay, after Brian is Julie Carrera. Julie is here speaking on behalf of Michael Casey, who's also here. So you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of committee. Brian Casagrande with FOTEN. I'm here on behalf of 3 property owners, Madam Chair, and while I hope I can keep this to 5 minutes, any grace you could offer me, so I had to sign up 3 times to get more time. Okay, I'll move as quickly as I can. Okay.
I just very clearly said that this is the rule. Now, normally, if I'd known that ahead of time, then yes, you would have been speaking on behalf of, you know, this one, like if,
I did note it on my...
town often does.
Understood. I did note it on my form, but anyways.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, don't start.
Yes.
Yeah, just get rolling here.
PDF. That one, thank you. So thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of 3 clients, as I mentioned. And first off, I do want to thank staff for their efforts. Broadly speaking, I've been involved with meetings with them, and they, as you've seen, they've certainly made concessions and tried to work with the industry, and that is broadly appreciated. But there are some concerns that remain for 3 of my clients in particular, and one you'll hear from Julie. And that really relates to what is effectively the removal of development rights. And in certain cases, it's adding a standard that logically is not needed. In other situations, is simply not warranted. So the first client that I'm here to speak about is Richcraft. They own the property at 19 Center Point, which is at the top of the slide. You'll see a PDF that is effectively the schedule that was established in 2008. Actually, sorry, I can't remember. That was about 5 or 6 years ago that these lands were rezoned. So I don't know if they qualify under the transition provisions, but Richcraft certainly have concerns site-specifically and broadly about these zoning provisions. Site-specifically, what you'll see on the slide, and if you can move it to the next one, Carol, below it, is an aerial photo that shows the lands in particular, and they abut a hydro transformer station and a playing field from the high school that's adjacent to it. And so when this was rezoned for high-rise development back about 5-6 years ago, the setback that was established on that edge was 3.5 meters. Now it's proposed to be 10. So effectively, you'll be taking away all of that development right from Richcraft through this initiative, and I think that's principally wrong and unfair. And Richcraft generally share this concern, broadly speaking, and you'll hear this on some of these other clients' files, where you're butting land uses that in many cases, and I would suggest most cases, do not warrant this type of setback. And I think that's really the key thing that is not entirely addressed in the zoning provisions that are before you today. Moving next to Scott Street, and if you can move up one more, Carol. Yes, thank you. So this piece of property, which is in Westboro at 2046 and 2050 Scott Street, there's 2 properties there that you'll see immediately west of the what is the curling rink, and they're owned by Surface Developments. It's basically under a numbered company. And Surface is anticipating applications very shortly that would contemplate a high-rise building on this property. It's across the street from the transit station, and high-rise would certainly be supported by the Westboro secondary plan right now, or the Richmond Road secondary plan. What you have immediately to the west of this property is a newly built mid-rise building. It's a condo building, and if you can move down the next image, realistically, this building, which you see in the background, will never, in any, maybe never, period, be redeveloped because it is a condo building, but certainly because of how new it is. So it doesn't warrant the type of 10-meter setback from a tower that's being proposed in this case. In my view, something more in the neighborhood of 2.5 meters would be appropriate. And then immediately to the east of that is the curling club rink property, which Surface has had discussions with, and there is a possibility on this and other properties that Surface owns where when you have large expansive properties next door, one can negotiate what would effectively be air rights with that property owner. So that property owner doesn't worry as much about this 10-meter step back. If they're compensated fairly, might be able to provide 12 or 14 or 15. And in those circumstances, the existing zoning is forcing one to go in and rezone to try and contemplate those scenarios, where I think the zoning bylaw could acknowledge when those scenarios exist that the 10 meters or something, as long as you get the 20-meter separation between the towers, which is the principal objective here, then you're checking the box of what the zoning is trying to contemplate or trying to accommodate. More importantly, on this property and all of the others, it's 50 square meters short of the minimum area requirements. And I've said to staff in our discussions, why are you putting a minimum lot size requirement on any of these properties for high-rise when the setbacks themselves are already dictating the built form that you want? In other words, if somebody were to do something creative like single load a hallway inside a corridor or inside a building design to make it narrower, why would you preclude them from trying to do that by simply stipulating a minimum lot size? It's a belt and suspenders approach that in my view is not necessary, and it's inhibiting some development sites like this one, which may be able to accommodate high-rise built form and still achieve the objectives. The last client that I'm here to speak on, I can't give you their property because they're involved with negotiations on the land and have been for a long time. It's about 400 meters from a rapid transit station. The property is being purchased by a company called DOV Capital. They're out of Toronto. And in their case, the property backs on to passive open space, similar to the Richcraft file that I showed you, but in this case, when I say passive, it's not designed with a playing field or any situation where somebody would be sitting and trying to enjoy sunlight or privacy or anything of that matter. It's basically green space with a bike path that passes through it. And so in their case, you're actually taking away development rights by stipulating a rear yard setback that will never be warranted. I know if we have discussions with staff, and we will, they'll see merit in reducing that yard, but as it stands today, they can develop a high-rise building on this property without tripping over this performance standard, and now effectively they're going to have to amend it. So those are my submissions. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Madam Chair, I'll have questions for staff. I'd like to get a response to our delegation's comments today. It sounds like there's, I don't want to call it a catch-22, but it seems like theirs seems a little more unique than what we're dealing with on a regular basis, and I want to know what the mitigations are.
Specific, you talked a lot about site-specific, but how would those be dealt with under the new plan?
Madam Chair, I think that's an excellent question, and that's something that actually I think is warranting a discussion in front of Planning Committee here. We have to recall that the zoning provisions that are...
Can I just get you to move your mic over a little bit so we can hear it a little more clear?
Is that better? Sorry about that. Madam Chair, again, these provisions are intended to complement the high-rise design guidelines that were passed by this committee last year on May 23rd, 2018. And what they represent is really what the city would consider to be the most acceptable outcome for occurring on a site. Now, there is no doubt that there are going to be site-specific issues that will arise. There is no doubt that there will be issues with respect to a particular use of property that is directly alongside one of these sites that may lead to a discussion about whether a setback may be reduced. The high-rise design guidelines provide discussion and provide some opportunity to have that discussion. And certainly staff would be more than willing to examine on a site-specific basis the opportunity to reduce those setbacks away from the zoning standard in cases where the architectural design, the programming of the space, the use of whatever it is that's alongside, and of course the interface between the high-rise site and whatever that site may be, if it so happens that it warrants that reduced setback, and if the planning rationale and the design rationale supports it, staff would certainly take that into effect and consider whether or not we would support that. But that needs to happen on the basis of that design discussion when that building comes to the table, and we can have a look at what is actually being proposed and how the design of this is actually moving forward.
So, and Mr. Casagrande is still here. Please stay there because I may go back and forth a little bit here. I think obviously your concern is if we pass this today, the window's closed on this, and your clients obviously have a concern about that. Would you like to comment on that? Would that be the case?
What we have found in general is a number of these high-rise sites do tend to come through zoning. I can't comment on the specifics of the particular lots that Mr. Casagrande has brought to the fore. I can't comment on what their current zoning might be or what their process would be. Generally, again, if a site is either zoned for mid-density or mid-rise right now and is looking for high-rise permission, they would need to go through a zoning permission anyway, and there's an opportunity to have that discussion on a site-specific basis as to whether the setbacks would apply. In the case of a development that is occurring in an area that is already zoned for high-rise, there is a variance process through the Committee of Adjustment that, again, can be used for those types of site-specific issues. And indeed, that is exactly what that process is for. Again, it is difficult to talk about sites on a specific basis with respect to what is before you today. What is before you today is intended to provide overall guidance for how neighbors and high-rise buildings should relate to one another. Again, site-specific situations will always arise. There will always be opportunities to vary those. But what we are looking at doing right now is providing that minimum set of standards that we will look for developers to live by.
And just as a follow-up to that, the one that kind of sticks out in my mind a little bit is the one closest to in the TOD region. And obviously I have a lot of transit-oriented development in my area. We're intensifying very heavily, which I support. We've got one 22-story tower and there's 4 more going on that parcel. Would these rules that we're looking at putting in play now, or guidelines I guess you can call them, would they affect that kind of development today?
If there's a secondary plan in effect that has provisions for separation distances or a lot area for high-rise buildings, then no, that they wouldn't. It would be the policies in that secondary plan or TOD plan that would apply.
Can I just touch on just one more thing as well, too, with respect to that as well, too, is a number of the TOD areas, and also I believe one of the sites that Mr. Casagrande referred to as well, too, has zoning that already has site-specific exceptions attached to those. And where those site-specific exceptions have provided for a design or an envelope that is different, then those site-specific zoning provisions would still be in effect. So in effect, if there is a site-specific exception that varies a setback, those would still remain in force.
So I guess I'll go back to the delegation now. Mr. Casagrande, what's your thoughts on what you're hearing today? Do you see an opportunity, or is there still a concern for your clients?
So that last comment is helpful specifically to 19 Centerpoint, which has the schedule that I showed you. So that will give Ridgecraft some relief relative to that site. But they asked me to speak more broadly today about concerns as the other clients I have. All of the client sites that I mentioned are within areas that I think, Councillor, you're referring to as TOD because they're near rapid transit, whether they're a TOD area that's in the zoning bylaw that went through the city's initiative or not is not necessarily the case, but they all have antiquated secondary plans or lack thereof, so they are going to be impacted negatively by what's being proposed. And I think generally what my biggest concern here is and this is, I know ideally for me, we'd have some more time to have more discussions with staff. I wish these clients engaged me to have those discussions earlier, otherwise I would have. But at the end of the day, what we're not objecting to what I think is the objective here, which is the 20-meter separation from towers. What we're asking the city to contemplate is, instead of simply saying, we're going to put this zoning down carte blanche all over the place, and then you come in one at a time and make an argument that it's not applicable, to look at specific conditions in advance and determine whether those situations might warrant a different performance standard, so that you're not automatically forcing somebody through this process. I'm not saying go site specifically through the city. What I'm saying is, if you're abutting an open space, if you're abutting a class heritage building that we know the city won't allow to come down, if you're abutting a hydro station, if you're abutting trying to think of one other example. Oh, well, the five-story mid-rise condo that's just freshly built. Like, these are circumstances where you know, or I know, the city won't easily, staff I mean, easily see an issue with this reduction, yet we're going to be forced to do it over and over and over again. And I'd love to be a little bit more precise in this zoning initiative to try and flesh some of that out in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Leeper, my concussion again. Sorry.
I'll try to phrase it as a question, but shouldn't this be a spur then that the development industry can agree on to get in place those modern, up-to-date, geography-sensitive secondary plans?
Certainly, like Councillor, but I think, and I've said to this committee many times that I'm an advocate for what you're trying to achieve in Westboro. That plan, for many reasons, needs to be redone. So, you know, it doesn't provide clarity for the communities, it creates tension. So and there's many examples. This 19 Centerpoint site is in a secondary plan area that if you read it, you would shake your head. So I know that needs to be done, and you won't hear me object to it. But this is a different initiative because that's policy, which we can work within. If our zoning allows something, then we make best efforts to comply with policy as we're going through a site plan process. But when you put zoning down, then you're forcing an application process, and you may be removing development rights. One of the other things I should have mentioned in response to Mr. Wise's comments about the design, city staff currently have control through the site plan process and the Planning Act to influence design. And they certainly have design guidelines which have come to bear on many applications. I know why they're concerned and I know why they're trying to move this initiative forward, because those don't have the same teeth as zoning. But at the end of the day, I'm worried that you're trying to kill a fly with a mallet, or, you know, you get what I'm trying to say. Like, the overkill here can be extreme, and I think there's a moment where we can pause and look at this more precisely, and maybe the Planning Act doesn't allow the type of controls in all the cases that I'm objecting here, but we haven't really had that type of discussion. I've been encouraging GOBA to come to the table to have that discussion, but they've been hesitant because there's been a lot of background negotiations through OPA 150 that they've been working with the city on, and so they don't want to be perceived as obstreperous and difficult, so they haven't come to the table on this matter, and they're basically asking each of these landowners to take up the fight on their own. And to be honest, most of them are asleep at the switch relative to this. So, you know, they're going to be upset later, and we're going to be moving through these applications. And as you talked about funding relative to the department, which, by the way, I fully support because Leanne's team is overwhelmed, they're going to get more overwhelmed with this initiative is also my fear.
And that's sorry to,
No,
that
it's
is
interesting
absolutely a
points.
concern, because, you know, we have Mr. Herwire's shop here that has done all the work on this and all of the huge amount of work to get us to here, but it absolutely is going to be Director of Planning, Ms. Nedden, who is going to have to get it done. And anyway, sorry.
No, it's interesting points to contemplate. I mean, obviously, communities like zoning because it provides them with certainty. And we have seen where, where flexibility is offered in policy, that frequently results in developments that are opposed by communities. I like zoning, and I don't see it as a particularly high bar to have to make a rezoning application in order to get something that is different. But your points are nonetheless well taken.
Councillor, if I can just respond to that precisely. My concern, I can get what your point is, but my concern is, so now we're setting setbacks, and the community is going to say, on these types of applications, we just rezoned this. We just put this zoning bylaw in place. Why are they already reducing it? And why are they going from 10 to 0 or 1? And so the answer is, well, it shouldn't have been put down in the first place on this site or that site. I understand. Ms. Ruddy's mentioning that we're subject to transition provisions if we just rezoned it, but I'm concerned about the next sites that I'm going forward. For example, the surface site. So next to a 5-story newly built condo building, I don't think staff are going to ask me to maintain a 10-meter setback from that. Right. But the community is going to look at that new zoning and say, well, why wouldn't you? And we'd have to explain. And the same is true on the other edge. And so this is my concern, is that I think some of these things can be looked at in advance so that when we do get a bylaw, most cases, it doesn't have to be changed and everybody understands that we're not throwing out something that's new and something that was supposed to be properly established.
I come back to the need for modern, defensible, up-to-date, geography-sensitive secondary plans. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Wise?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to note for the committee's knowledge, and again, the tower separation applies to the tower portion. It would not necessarily apply from the ground level up. In fact, actually, the podium section of the tower would not be subject to the tower portion, and that can go up a considerable distance before the tower separation would in fact apply. So there is that distinction that I think that needs to be made.
And it's not a small distinction. I mean, it's a very large distinction, because where do you put the tower on top of the podium has a dramatic impact. Mr. James and his team is working on one right now that we've had many conversations about. I think it's also in Councillor Leeper's area, and there's huge potential with that piece of it too. But anyway, thank you. Anyone have any more questions for Mr. Casagrande? Does anybody else have any questions? No. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Julie Carrera. Julie coming forward on behalf of Mr. Casey. You coming too, Michael? Yep. Okay, well, we'll have to shift somebody. Do you have a presentation, or are you just speaking?
I have a slide just to show the property.
Okay.
Just a quick overview of the property.
We'll get you two chairs together.
Thank you. Oh, jeez. There we go. No, sorry.
Just wanted to make sure.
It's not showing up. Okay, you know what? Maybe it's the wrong key. Don't worry about it. No, it's okay. Can we just try this one? Yeah, graphic there. It's just a PDF here you can open. Thanks. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We ready?
We are
Okay,
ready, thank
great.
you.
My name's Julie Carrera. I'm a senior planner at Photon Consultants, and I'm here with Mike Casey from Gilead Properties. We reviewed the proposed high-rise provisions on behalf of Gilead, and we have concerns with one property, which is up on the screen. The municipal address is 180-190 Besserer, which is on the south side of Besserer between Waller and Cumberland. It's a very wide but quite shallow property. It's my understanding that the city expropriated land along Besserer in order to widen the right-of-way, and in recognition of the resulting lot depth constraint has added an exception that removes minimum required yard setbacks. So I can only assume that the block to the immediate east is representative of what the original block depth was. On that adjacent block, there are two 12-story, what you would call bar buildings as opposed to a podium tower building. And to the north of the site, we have several 20 up to 25-story high-rise developments. So the lot area is almost twice what has been proposed as a minimum required lot area for a high-rise development on a corner lot. So we meet that requirement, no problem. The problem is when you apply the proposed tower setbacks, which would be 10 meters along the south lot line, which is the interior side, 10 meters along the west, which is the rear lot line. So you're only left with about 16.5 meters in from Besserer for a tower footprint, which is quite shallow and would be very challenging to achieve. So the current policy framework, it's the Central Area Secondary Plan from pre-amalgamation. It does speak to mid-rise, and the existing zoning has a schedule that does cap it below a high-rise development. But the current context of this site, including being within 400 meters of the LRT station, having these high-rises to the north and the low-rise to the south, which makes it a good transition property between the higher and the lower, supports potentially a high-rise development on this site in the future. And so if there were to be through a future zoning bylaw amendment application, if a high-rise was permitted, given the characteristics of the lot, a bar building would probably be your best bet because you don't have much room to do a tower within those setbacks. And the council-approved design guidelines for high-rise buildings do speak to allowing a bar building up to 12 stories. However, the proposed zoning provisions don't seem to address bar buildings at all. It's probably because generally we're looking for the podium tower development, but there are circumstances where it could be the best built form to do a bar building. So through our letter to Planning Committee, we've requested that the existing zoning exception, which is exception 960, be revised to contain a statement that the proposed tower setbacks, which will be incorporated in a particular section of the zoning bylaw, that those setbacks would only apply above 12 stories, so that in the future, if there was a high-rise, you'd only have to do the podium tower concept above 12 stories. So basically, we're not asking you to increase the height today. We're just asking that there be recognition in the zoning that this site's already been constrained by road widening, and that if these new high-rise zoning provisions are approved, we'd like them to only apply above 12 stories.
We've been the owners of this piece of land for a number of years, and we have tried working with the University of Ottawa to create student housing. And these latest proposed changes effectively eliminate the development potential of the site. It's tantamount to having a second expropriation. And so the desire to establish setbacks for towers, I acknowledge is needed, but I also acknowledge that there are unique areas that have to be dealt with separately, and we're here today because we don't want to have to come back a second time. And so why create double the workload? I've heard staff say, show us a design. So there's a couple of $100,000 spent to achieve something that is in a format that they can be happy with the appropriate studies and everything. And I don't think we need to spend that money at this time, and I think the city needs to exhibit some flexibility and acknowledge that there are sites that, through their expropriations of the past, have created conditions that warrant acknowledgement and change at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask for, anybody have any questions for either Mr. Casey or Ms. Carrera? You raised some really good points. So I'm just going to ask for a couple of minutes of a little bit of a break, okay? Don't go anywhere. Thank you. You can go back and take your seats. Thank you. Just hang on, everybody. Ms. Snedden's on a little bit of a mission. I could tell you about Miss Snedden's Nepean days. His deep roots. I can tell you about Mr. Herwire's Nepean days. I can tell you about Mr. Collings' Nepean days. Yeah. I know, don't encourage me, you know, I didn't ask for it. Okay, hang on. Okay, so I have that bit of information. I just, you know, we were good examples that we've had from the delegations, and you know, Ms. Snedden being the director of a different part of planning compared to Mr. Herwire, just wanted to make sure that her team was on, you know, had listened to the delegations as well, and were comfortable. And Ms. Snedden, did you want to say anything?
Madam Chair, the team is fully supporting the design guidelines that are before committee today.
Okay, so did you, Mr. Wise, did you meet with Mr. K on this application, Mr. Casey's land?
Madam Chair, yes, we did.
So the concerns that he's outlined, that he's basically stymied on all sides of it, and it reduces his ability to do anything with it. What do you say about that?
Well,
and also include whether what we're going to do today would cause them to have to come in at least once, spend more money. They're going to have to come in for an application anyways to develop this site, right?
I think the thing that we have to recall about this particular site is that it is currently zoned for 8 stories in height, and 8 stories in height, 24.1 meters in height is what its current zoning allows. Also, the secondary plan as well too, enforced for this area as well too, also contemplates mid-rise as well too. So from staff's perspective, the applicant would need to come in for both application, zoning and official plan. Part of the challenge with that is, again, we understand the site is narrow. It does have constraints on it. And again, that is part of the nature when you have a site that is more challenging like that. We really do need to have that discussion as to what is appropriate on that site. Again, because the secondary plan also contemplates mid-rise on this, the discussion about whether a high-rise is appropriate on it is something that needs to be had, and then that's the discussion about what setbacks might be appropriate. That's a more, from staff's perspective, opportune discussion to have those dealings.
Mr. Wang, you're shaking your head. Did you have anything to add?
I think David has speak to what the key point is, and the fact that there is an application. If a proposal for a high-rise development is proposed on the site, there will be application to occur, and it will be subject to the urban design review and the site plan control and the zoning and all sorts of things. So the process will occur anyways.
What about the comments that we've heard too about, I think Mr. Foten, Mr. Casagrande brought up about, you know, where we know that there's heritage buildings that it's inflexible to change in that. You know, does this cause some kind of sterilization of the property at a time when we're revisiting, Mr. Fu is revisiting our population future growth, where it can go, what we have available. This one would be, I think, proximity to Rideau station, proximity to Ottawa U, right? I mean, it's in the heart of everything, really. In fact, right in, 2 stations, actually. So what about those kind of challenges they're talking about? And is it going to mean that they're going to, well, here's another question, too. If they can go 8 stories, could they legitimately call the 8 stories a podium and come back and ask for a tower of some kind on top of it that would better meet? Because an 8 stories is not a high building. And it's what it's allowed now. So presumably, even if he was to build now, he could mass out on that narrow property. Who wants to answer that? Carol?
I mean, if he wanted to do that, he could. Right tomorrow, he could apply for site plan control for that. But I think practically speaking, from a construction perspective, maybe it might be a little more complicated. I don't know. I would like to say that in contexts like heritage and adjacent to an O1 zone, such as a park, they're still allowed to go straight up 9 stories. According to the setbacks for that zone. And in the case of mixed-use downtown, they can go straight up 9 stories from 0 lot line and then take the setback in. And in other zones, they're just subject to the setbacks for side lot line and rear lot line for their podium, and they can go straight up 9 stories. That 10-meter setback only applies to the tower portion. So the provisions are very flexible and do allow quite a high podium.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Councillor Kavanagh?
Thank you very much. Appreciate reading this. Very interested because there will be a lot of buildings going up in Bay Ward with Stage 2 LRT. So good to know what's going on as it comes out. One of the things that we talked about in the report was about views, like not being too close to other buildings for views. And that's come up in discussion already because I have many existing condo buildings. And as much as we want intensification, there's already buildings that exist that are concerned about their views being blocked because I'm right on the water. And people like those views. And so I know it's meant to be like how close they are to the tower, so you're not looking at each other's bedroom windows, but I'm also wondering if that is something that is being looked at as well for people who have had long-standing, access to a beautiful view of the water.
Madam Chair, the preservation of views is always a difficult conversation with people who've enjoyed a right, what they feel to be a right, a perceived right for quite a long time. And that is something that we wrestle with respect to low-rise infill, mid-rise, high-rise, all of those things. And that is something that really is best left to that site-specific design discussion. Mr. Casagrande made the point that from his perspective, the zoning was very much a hammer coming down. And with that, I would agree. There is times when zoning is a sledgehammer, when a scalpel is needed. And in that case, when we're talking about how we finesse the preservation of sight lines from one site to another with respect to key areas or to desirable points of view, that is something that happens at a site plan level, and we talk about that with respect to the architecture of a site and whether there might be the opportunity to do some articulation with that. Again, it's not something that we can really factor in with respect to the zoning at this level, but it is something that the design guidelines provide some flexibility to work with at the site plan level.
I had to pass that on because I'm getting asked that question a lot already. So I thought this was the best opportunity to do that so that it can be, put into consideration. My other question is about a climate change lens. Was that taken into consideration with these updates? I hope that that's still, that's a factor when we do anything in terms of planning.
Madam Chair, Councillor, this is an excellent question. And in fact, the separation distance we're talking about are minimum separation distance in order to ensure the basic livability conditions for the people who are who can enjoy the living in the high-rise environment. And so by doing so, what we wanted to do is to encourage to making the high-rise environment more attractive to people, so that by extension we're sort of trying to support the smart growth principles, support intensification. Thereby, we support the objective of addressing climate change concerns. So it's not direct, but there's indirect implications on it. And the other part of this, as Carol and David pointed out, that the idea of having some minimum separations is to make the public realms more enjoyable for people to walk and for business to thrive. And by doing so, again, we support our general objectives of the official plan, and certainly this will help to address the concerns about climate change as well. But it's not a direct, but it's indirect contribution towards addressing climate change.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping that the green space is counterbalancing the fact that, you know, we have so much land being used.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councillor, exactly. So, for example, if we were to grow street trees in the streets, and certainly you would have wanted to have light in the streets, and without the light, the trees can be very difficult to survive. So, in a high-rise environment, when there is a cluster of high-rise buildings, you want the streets to receive a minimum light, and so that the street trees can thrive. So, this multifaceted kind of benefits for offering minimum separation between the towers. And so yes, it's a physical, it's a microclimate, it's the experience of the pedestrians, and it is also the fact that we want to encourage people to live there and in the long term, rather than being short-term tenants of a high-rise building. I think all of these kind of things has been taken into consideration, and to make the high-rise living more attractive and to people, and to support our objectives of addressing climate change, official plans with respect to intensification and the transit-oriented development, and so on.
Thank you. Do we encourage green roofs? Is that part of it? I don't know if it fits into this, but
I think we're off topic now. We could have a...
It is in the design guideline, but it is not in the zoning bylaw. Zoning bylaw speaks to minimum standards, and the design guideline has a lot of more meat in it. And yes, this through the application process, we do negotiate. We're always asking questions such as sustainable features being included and those kind of things. And so that's what the process is for, is to say, you know, under the circumstances, we want to encourage sustainable features to be included.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Anybody else have any questions? No, we're good? Okay, so thank you to the delegations that came out today. And on the item of zoning provisions for high-rise buildings, an amendment to correct an anomaly in the GM general mixed-use zone concerning high-rise buildings. Is that carried? Carried. I want to thank staff very much for all the work you've done. I think this story isn't totally written yet, and I think that we'll learn from it. But I think that their directions. They're directions. They are guidelines, right? And we're going to work towards the guidelines. But at least we have the guidelines in place that we are all going to be moving in the same direction. So thank you very much. Do we have anything else that we've held? Oh, thank God. All right. Any inquiries? Notices of motion? Other business? We're adjourned. Next meeting is October the 10th. Thank you.